Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Full Stack Lunch Meetup hosted by Walmart Labs as well as IBM. And so with this, I want to start off with an introduction. I've got to know how to move the slides here, of course. Aha. So with this, I want to go over our agenda for today. I also want to do a sponsor acknowledgement. We want to get into Redux. For those of you who are not familiar with Redux, it is a state management library, heavily used by React. It could be used by any UI framework, though, even server rendered if you'd like. And we have Mark Erikson, rock star with Redux here. I have to say it. I look up to this guy a lot. And anybody that's seen the Redux repo, their docs, just first-class stuff. Very excited about that. Next, we're going to get into building a full-stack React Express Redux application with me. So I'm going to share my experiences that I've had building applications with this stack over the past, it's been about a year and a half, maybe more like a year, that I've been using this stack, and I love it. So we're going to go through an application that I've built, and we're going to establish a timeline for going over the individual features of that application. And then in subsequent meetups, we're going to start tackling those and build those. And then at the end, it's time to hang out. We have raffle items. So I've received almost 100 different tutorials to raffle off. We're unfortunately not going to do all 100 today, but we'll do a few. And these are from big names in the industry, so we'll get to that here in a little bit as well. With that, I'd like to acknowledge some of our sponsors. So first, let me bring up Claude with Walmart Labs.
Hey, how you guys doing today? So, how many people have heard about Walmart Labs at all? All right, so that's good. You guys know what Walmart Labs is doing. What have you heard about it in the industry? Trying to take out Amazon. That's the number one thing. You're definitely, so there's a couple different locations of Walmart. The Carlsbad location has been around for about 5 years. And so we focus more on internal tools, A/B testing platform, continuous integration delivery. We have a data platform team here that does a lot of big data, caching sort of solutions. And then in the Bay Area is where kind of the hub is at, where they do a lot of the e-commerce web development. So a lot of the stuff that we do here is helping support the e-commerce space up there. We are looking to hire as well. This event in partnership with Paul and Leslie is a diversity event. One of the things that we've been really striving for is to find talent in North County to really help promote Walmart as a tech company. So the idea that this is a full house is definitely something where we're. I just want to thank you guys for, helping to put this on. I want to thank you guys for actually coming out on your lunchtime to kind of hear some great information. And I look forward to future meetups.
Thanks, Claude. With that, let's jump in. So IBM, I want to thank them. IBM has helped support the pizzas, the food that we have here today, as well as support with Niall Cargill. He's an IBMer, and he has really helped organize this meetup with me. The AV is imperative. Without him, we wouldn't have what's going on. And he's just been a great friend and supporter along my journey of learning JavaScript, Node, and so forth. And so I want to thank him personally for his help. I want to get to some of our tutorial sponsors. So for those of you familiar with the community, some of these names are going to be recognizable. For those of you not familiar with React, Redux, Express, and Mongo, this may not be. But first, Andrew Mead, he has probably been single-handedly the biggest influence on me when it comes to learning Node. He's a Udemy instructor. If you check him out, solid 5 stars, really energetic, really detailed, and really gets into covering everything you need to build your create, read, update, and delete functionality with Node. Writes tests for everything that you create. So awesome instructor. I've got 24 tutorials that we can raffle off from him. Next up here is Front-End Masters, really big influence in the UI community. And so this isn't necessarily just React. This goes with any UI framework. But we've got another 24 tutorials to offer up from them. Moving on, Stephen Grider. Just as Andrew's been very instrumental in myself learning Node, Stephen Grider has been very instrumental in learning Redux and React. His advanced Redux and React course that he has on Udemy is on par with Andrew's, just simply fantastic. So great work that he does on all of his tutorials. Again, you're going to see solid 5 stars from him as it relates to user reviews. We've got Tyler McGinnis, very big in the React community. He has a lot of tutorials that he's offered up as well. And then Wes Bos, not necessarily just React, but his beginner React course is just awesome. So for those of you who have taken that, you can echo me on that. For those of you who have not, I'd highly suggest his React for Beginners course. He also has a Node course and then a Redux course, which gets into the advanced features of Redux. Also big with CSS, so those of you that are looking into Grid, he's got some courses on that as well. In addition, the Syntax podcast. He and another developer called Scott Talinsky host that podcast. I'd highly recommend checking it out. It's great listening podcast. So it doesn't get into too much detail where it pulls your focus away from whatever you're working on, but it's great conversation and discussions around what's going on in the development community right now. Highly recommend checking that out. So with that, we want to get into the State of the Union with Mr. Erikson.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Mark Erikson, and I'm very excited to share with you some of the stuff that's going on in the world of Redux. Now, it's very likely that most of you out there have no idea who I am, which is fine. You might be familiar with some of the stuff I've done online. I am an answerer of questions. I spend a lot of my time answering questions about React and Redux and other related topics in a whole bunch of different places online. I'm at AceMarkE in most places and at Mark Erikson on GitHub and Stack Overflow. I maintain a couple large lists of links to useful resources on React, Redux, Webpack, and associated topics, as well as a list of links to Redux-related tools and libraries. I spend a lot of time writing very long blog posts, again, primarily about React and Redux. I've got one series in particular called Practical Redux, which is tutorials for specific useful React and Redux-related techniques. And I have another series called Idiomatic Redux that is more about the theory and ideas of why you do things certain ways in Redux and what I consider to be good best practices. And I'm also a co-maintainer of Redux. I've spent most of my time working on docs-related updates. I wrote the Redux FAQ. I wrote the docs section on structure and reducers. And I've worked with a bunch of other people to add some various other updates to the docs as well. But if you haven't heard of me from any of those things, then it's possible you might know me as that guy with the Simpsons avatar pretty much everywhere online. I was playing around with some Simpsons head maker years ago, and when I started actually signing up for services, just started using it, and now it's just sort of my thing. So you might have seen that in a few places. So what is going on with Redux right now? Now, there's a few different things. The first thing is that we've actually got Redux for Beta 1 that just came out a couple weeks ago. Now, if you look at the timeline of Redux releases, Redux 1.0 came out in mid-August of 2015, just a couple months after the initial development started. Redux 2.0 came out 2 weeks after that. Redux 3.0 came out in the middle of September, and we've been at 3.something ever since. I think the current version is 3.7.2. So Redux has not really changed a lot publicly since just a couple months after its initial release. So we're finally getting ready to roll out a version 4.0, and the other primary maintainer, Tim Dorr, has been doing pretty much all the work on this aspect. Despite the major version bump, there's actually not much that really changed that you would notice. The biggest change is actually a lot of work on the TypeScript typings for Redux. Because that would potentially break a lot of people's builds with some of the type definition changes, we figured it was best to roll that into a major version update. There's some internal changes, some handling some edge cases a little bit differently. We changed the internal function we use to check whether an action is a plain object or not, try to make that a little faster. So it's primarily internal stuff. The public API is still the same. In fact, we would actually request that if you can, give 4.0 beta a shot. You know, hopefully nothing breaks. We don't expect anything to break, but there's enough changes it was worth bumping the major version. Now, the next really big thing, it's kind of running off the screen there. The next big thing that will be changing coming down the road actually relates to the React Redux bindings. If you've been paying any attention to what's going on with React itself over the last few months, the React team has been really busy pushing forward on new development. React 16.0 was a complete internal rewrite of React's internal update algorithm, and that process was codenamed React Fiber. With React 16.0, they kept the public API and behavior exactly the same, trying to maintain maximum compatibility across the ecosystem, but the internal changes have given them a new platform to be able to push forward with new features and new functionality. And so React 16.3 should be out in the next few weeks. 16.4 will be out sometime later this year. And 16.4 is where they're going to start including some of this new async rendering capability, which has to do with things like maybe you start trying to show a new screen, but you don't have all the data for that screen yet, and maybe you want to show it when a promise resolves. Or you start to do a big update to the UI, but rather than block the browser JavaScript thread the entire time, React will break the work up into little chunks, and maybe it starts to process the render update, and then another update comes in, like the user typing in the text box. So it kind of has to pause the big work, set it aside, do the quick update to the text box, and then pick up where it left off. That's going to require a lot of changes to how the state management libraries like Redux or MobX or even Apollo actually interact with React in terms of getting the data updates in and triggering the changes. So there's been some discussions with the React team on where they're headed. We're going to have to do some pretty big updates on like the React Redux bindings to deal with that going forward. The other big change is the context API. So we all know state and props with React. React also has this API called context that allows data to be passed from ancestors to deeply nested descendants. But it has problems. If a component returns false from should component update, the context updates get blocked. So the React team has been promising that we're going to have a new context API someday. It's going to fix all the problems. Someday is 16.3. They've merged in a new context API. The old one's not going away yet. They'll be side by side. But now libraries can start taking advantage of this new API going forward. So hopefully, React Redux will encapsulate pretty much all these changes internally, and your apps won't have to worry about it at all. It is very possible that, especially with the async rendering, some of these may require some public-facing changes in how you set up your store and the React Redux setup process. So we'll try to encapsulate that as much as possible, but keep an eye on things. There probably will be some breaking changes around this. A couple other things that I personally am excited about. I mentioned a minute ago that I keep a big list of Redux-related add-ons and libraries and tools. At this point, it's got somewhere close to like 2,000 different links in there. And the list is getting kind of big. It's basically just a big set of markdown files that I add the links to, and you can browse them in the GitHub repo. And for a while now, I've had this idea, it would be really cool if someone built a client-side UI that allowed people to filter and sort the different links in there, like show how many GitHub stars and NPM downloads the different packages have. And just in the last couple of weeks, a couple people took up this idea and they're actively starting to work on it. They're doing a bunch of like UI mock-ups and parsing the markdown. I'm really excited with where this project is going. I think it's going to be a useful tool for the community and help people to better find tools that help solve their use cases. And speaking of other tools, I see all kinds of new libraries coming out all the time. Two specific ones that I'm very excited about. A lot of people complain about, there's too much boilerplate around Redux. I have to spend all this time writing separate files for action creators and constants and reducers and components, or the process of updating data in a reducer, especially if it's deeply nested, can be a real problem, and I can accidentally mutate my state, and it's just a pain. So two specific libraries that came out recently that really help address both of these issues. One is called Immer, and it's from Michelle Westrate, the author of the MobX library. And this library uses the ES6 proxy feature to wrap up pieces of your state in a reducer, and you can write normal standard mutative code in your JavaScript. Now, normally if I wanted to copy and stuff and do immutable updates, you have to copy this, copy ... state, this field, ... state, this field, and just keep, spreading the objects, concatenating the arrays, copying everything all the way down. With Immer, I could actually write state.someObject.someArray bracket 5 equals true. And when the wrapper function returns, it actually safely copies every level of nesting that you just modified. So you just, call this Immer produce function, pass in the original state, and write a callback. You mutate the data in the callback, but it doesn't actually change the original data. And when the callback returns, it makes all the copies you would have had to write yourself anyway. I have actually not had a chance to use this library myself yet, but it looks great. It's already got a couple thousand stars on GitHub, and it looks like it can really simplify your logic in reducers. The other interesting one is called Redux Bundler. Henrik Jorteg has worked on things like the new Starbucks progressive web app, and this is kind of his toolkit that he's been using to build several big production applications. And it's got some very interesting features like being able to define reusable chunks of Redux logic that can be combined together at runtime, hooked together in a lazy loaded manner, simplifying definitions for connected components and selector functions and actions. And it looks like it can really simplify a lot of the setup process for logic in a Redux application. So there's a lot of other stuff out there, but these are some of the things that I'm excited about right now. So with that, I'll put out a few obligatory plugs for my own stuff. I just started a weekly email newsletter a few weeks ago. I think I've got 3 of them out so far. I usually try to put it out on Tuesday mornings. So if you're interested, the sign up is at tinyletter.com/acemarkey. A few months ago, I took my practical Redux tutorial series on my blog and I turned it into an interactive course on educative.io. During that process, I was able to do some updates, some things that have changed since I first wrote the post on my blog. It actually includes some neat runnable examples of the application that I build over the course of the series. So if you'd like to check that out, it's over there. And I actually just announced that I will be partnering with Ryan Florence, who's co-author of the React Router library and has been working with doing React training stuff. Ryan's going to be partnering with a bunch of people from the community to do workshops across the country on different topics. And so I'll actually be doing some Redux workshops over the course of the year. The only one we've actually scheduled so far is in New York City in April. Open to suggestions for other locations. I would very possibly consider doing one in San Diego sometime later this year. If you'd like one out here, like talk to Ryan and tell him you want to schedule one or something. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll be happy to chat afterwards about React, Redux, whatever's going on. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's happening in the community right now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. So again, thank you for coming, giving us the State of the Union. I personally use Redux, love it, and am excited to see all the upcoming changes, especially with the updates to React. As he mentioned, React went through a complete rewrite, and there's just so many fantastic things coming down the pipeline from that group. It's just amazing. So with that, I want to jump into what I'm going to be presenting, and this is going to be a full stack application with React, Express, Redux, and Mongo. I do have a quick announcement regarding parking, and so I'd like to have Leslie come up for that.
All right, folks. We have a very small parking lot north of the building, and there is a white line in the middle, towards the end. If you park in one of the last 6 spots towards the left, we need you to please move your car. Those belong to the other tenants. You won't get towed or anything, we think. No one's gotten towed so far, but, you know, make sure you move the car. Yes, on that side, on the part away from the street. Sorry that you have to miss a small part of it. That is it.
All righty. Okay, let me make sure I can do what I'm going to need to do here.
No, just the parking lot right here next to the building. All the way to the end is the one that needs to. No, that side is good. That side is good, and the one on the other driveway is also good.
Okay, what did you do?
Small parking lot.
Alt tab.
And if you want to see it on the other screen, you might have to.
Could I do both, or should we just put one over the other? That would work too. Go ahead and open up the Chrome. Beautiful. Okay. Perfect. Okay, guys. So what I want to cover today is what we're building. We're going to establish the agenda, establish some timelines, and then we might be able to jump into some code depending on our time frame and how much time we have left. But if not, we'll definitely get into some code next time because that's where the fun begins. So what are we building? What's the motivation behind this? Why did I build this thing? What am I looking to accomplish? We're going to go through the demo. We're also going to cover the features of this, what it allows. From my perspective, I built this for my clients. So I'm an independent web developer. I build e-commerce applications for small business. And I want to give my clients the ability to not only have a website that's very performant, built with the latest stack, built with the tools that are going to give the best usability. I also want to allow them to edit and change things. And so we're going to get into some of that as well. We're going to cover libraries. So what libraries am I using? Why did I use those? These are going to be my favorite. There's obviously going to be more libraries in the actual applications, both the client and the server. But we're going to cover some of my favorites here. And then we're going to get into the timeline. So what are we building? First and foremost, a website builder. Reusability is very important to me. As an independent web developer, once you build a few websites for clients, you realize you have multiple code bases. And you have to keep those code bases either up to date or when you go back to change one client's code, you potentially have to rewrite a lot of it that you didn't realize you were going to because of updates you made to another app. So to keep everything consistent, I wanted to allow the user to build it as well as myself. If I can build the website through a user interface and the user can edit that, I have less to maintain ongoing, and my job of creating maybe a one app for all applications of that app becomes much easier. E-commerce, so this has to allow for products, checkout, ordering, and then order confirmation, email notification, all the stuff that goes along with ordering products online. And I wanted to provide the latest UI. I'm a big fan of Material UI. That is a React framework which uses the material design principles. For those of you who are not familiar with material design, it is an implementation of design that Google has put out. You may see it heavily used in Android apps as well as Google sites. The piece I like the most about this is the amount of thought given to design principles. So if you look into the docs on material design, they have looked into everything, identified the heat maps, where people's eyes go, how people use the application, the correct margins, paddings, all this stuff has been studied and identified. I like that approach, and I like that there's docs to back it up, and I like it provides a standard. Some of the other options that my clients had, as well as I had to build their applications, are the big names, the Wix, the Squarespaces, the Shopifys out there. One big advantage I feel I have going with a UI framework is a standard for design. And those designs, as we'll see, can be modified on individual bases. But it allows something where there's been a lot of study and work put in to identify best practices. So with that, what's the motivation? I need to support designers with quick implementations. Building a site from scratch, hard coding everything, that could take weeks, months, depending on the site. When any of these clients could go to some of these big names and have it up within 15 minutes, according to what some of them say. So I needed to be able to be on par with that. Also, after the first couple clients I had, I always heard, what can I do if I want to go back and update? And if you hard code things, you got to come back through me. I've got to bill you. There's this whole dynamic that has to take place, which may deter people from that. So given the fact it's small business, there's a balance between what they're willing to get from a developer and then what they may just want to seek on their own through some of these big brand website builders. I needed to establish one app for multiple designs. As I mentioned earlier, having multiple code bases, for any of you that have worked on client applications, maybe you establish client 1 and you have your code base for that. You work on client number 3, you figured out a better way to do things. Do you go back and update client 1? Do you wait until client 1 needs help and then you go back and update and then you realize, oh my gosh, I've got all this stuff that needs to be updated to make the app where client number 3's app is. So I wanted to cut through all that. I didn't want to have multiple apps out there that all potentially needed updating and all potentially would require a huge investment of my time as well as a potential investment from the customer as it relates to cost. So one app, multiple design solutions, dynamic CSS. What a lot of these other website builders don't have is you editing the CSS. I love CSS and I love style. I don't want to hard code it. I want to store it in Mongo and then change it as I need to. So that was one of the motivations. Don't have static CSS. Customizable, reusable design components. So going through this process, there was a pattern that became evident. And that pattern was a site has pages. The page has sections. The section has components. So building in this flow, we'll be able to establish a reusable pattern for the UI, but that we can totally customize in any way we want to. E-commerce, I needed to have this thing to be able to support shopping carts, products, orders, checkout. So with that, let's get to the demo. So with that, Uh-oh, I think I just killed the presentation. Niall? What do I do to go back? Alt-Tab. And we're at WebEx. Am I back? Alt-Tab. They kill the PowerPoint. Okay, we're getting back here. So I was at, demo, and then let's full screen that. Okay, now to get back to the web, here we go. Aha. Well, now I'm not going to be able to see it. So this is my family here. How can I see that, though? Let's try this again. Okay, I think I'm getting there. No, I can't get it onto where I can see it. So we're trying to do two windows. Yeah, no pressure, guys. Let's go back to PowerPoint. So where was the Chrome? Oh, so I've got to do this way then. Okay. So this will be a little trickier. Okay, so what I want to go over here is a few things. So first, I'm going to try to do this off of memory so I don't have to jump back and forth. But we want to talk about user accounts. So with this, we need a way to establish and authenticate users. We also want to do some things a little different. I want to make this very interactive. And so you're going to notice we have field level validation going on. Let me get myself. And I want to show how we can report errors back. So any of you familiar with Node and errors, throwing errors on the server? When you throw an error, you get a kind of a custom-made object where the key is error and the value is the error that was thrown. In order to feed stuff in and get field level validation, we're going to create our own error object. And so we can create an instance of the error class. We can kind of define how we want to handle options we pass into this instance of the class. And so with that, we can do things where we can get field level validation, both on the button and in the individual field. So email not found. Let's say we go back, we get a correct email, but we have a password that doesn't match. We can do the same thing. So this allows us to give information back to the client that's not only reporting the error, but giving us a field level issue. So with that, let's log in. Okay, now we're back in. I want to go over tokens a little bit here. So what we're going to want to do with tokens, it's full screen, wow. Let's go to our application. Let's go to our local storage. There's a few different ways to handle authentication. A lot of you have probably heard of passports. That's definitely an option. However, I like to understand everything that goes on with authentication. I particularly love authentication and how it works. And so what we're going to look into with that is how to establish a couple different tokens. An access token, which we're going to expire every 24 hours. So if the user's logged in, they have an access token that's valid, they can continue to use the site. Now let's say it's after 24 hours. Access token's invalid. We're going to go through and then check the refresh token. If the refresh token is valid, we're going to refresh both tokens, send those back to the client so they're re-authenticated. But this is something that would be implemented with Passport. You probably have to handle the client side yourself just like you would in any application. But we're going to cover this. This was something I just found fascinating when I first started to tackle this. So let's get out of the developer tools. And let's see if this will close it for me. No. Oh, it's in a separate window. Perfect. Okay. So we went through authentication. We're also going to have functionality to reset and refresh, or I'm sorry, recover accounts. So if a user forgets their password, we'll go through how to establish that and implement that into the application. Let me jump back to the presentation just to make sure I'm on track. Sign in, sign up, recovery, reset. Brand. So this is where we get into design principles. And so with this, we're going to jump back. With this, we're going to establish something called the admin. This is going to be accessible to only people that are authenticated with a role of either admin or owner. So in addition, authentication will cover role-based authentication as well, so you guys can see how that works. But in the brand, we're going to have things like their API config. This is something we're only going to call when this page is requested because this has keys in it. This information you don't want stored in the app. You don't really ever want to have this information public. And so we're going to request this when this page is loaded and then delete it when the page is moved away from. We're going to cover business. So in here, we're going to allow them to edit different things with the business. Fonts, anything that I've found a client needs that can customize their brand. So when I'm talking about a brand, I'm talking about what makes their business look and feel unique from other businesses. So in here, we could do things like change the font. Let's see. My last client loved Dancing Script, and I thought it was pretty neat stuff. We're going to go down and save that. And what this will allow us to do is get a different app bar appearance. So we've got that. We can also go in and customize that app bar. So let's go into the brand. We'll go to the theme. This is where we get into some Material UI stuff, and I'm going to bring them up quickly here as well so you can kind of see what I'm talking about with Material UI. But if we go to the app bar, I've had a few requests for images up in the app bar. And so we can come in here and we can go display image. We can change this to true. We'll go back, put this in there. And then we can get a nice image up there that they can have both in the drawer and in their app bar. Let's go change this back to false. And then we also have positioning that allows me to kind of overflow it over the app bar. Updated. We'll look at how to make this button. So, you know, it's easy to find out if a successful request was made to the server. But how do we make that a little interactive? You know, there's different ways to show errors and notifications. We could have modals pop up. I've always been a fan of not distracting the user, so not having stuff pop up, not having UI change. So our two options are really the inputs, popping something in below that, which I feel is a good approach, and then also displaying something in the button. And so those are the two approaches I went with. The button, you know, I don't want to have a red error there for the remainder of them using possibly this page, so we'll do a set timeout to remove that. I think we do it after 4 seconds. Let's go back into brand. I want to show you some other things that we can do in the brand. This may look like a lot of forms, and you might be thinking, oh my gosh, there's going to be tons of forms to create. We can actually abstract all that into very few forms. So there's 3 forms that this app uses total. One is going to be a modal kind of form we're going to show with some of the components that can be edited. And then there's going to be these guys, which we just feed data into. So you can create a JSON object of all the different fields you want, feed in the data, and you get these dynamic forms. So there's not a whole lot of form work that needs to be done. Palette, so this is going to be where all the palette information can be edited. Material UI uses a schema that provides a primary color and then a secondary color, also a common color, and then air color, gray. They have a bunch of different options. For any of you familiar with Material UI, generally they'll have about, I think it's 10 different color options for each color, and then they'll decide whether it's a 400 or 300 implementation of that color based off of what you're doing. The Material UI folks, so a little bit different from Material Design, Material UI, which is a React framework, simplified this and is in the process of simplifying. They're right now in version 1 beta. And so this app has to be a living organism in a way because they're not quite at V1 and there are breaking changes that come out. One of the simplifications they made, though, as you can see with gray, you've got 50, 100, 200, 300, all these different guys here. I tried an implementation of, you put in one color and then I adjust the hues to try to match the Material Design, but it's not an algorithm that's that simple. So the thought they put into colors and the aspects of color, which I didn't even know existed, there's so many different aspects of color, really this is the only approach. The Material Design people simplified it a little bit with one of their new releases, so they did a light, main, dark, and 300, and this seems to work. So there's less data to input, but I just wanted to cover some of the items that we can do with the palette. Same thing exists for typography, so if we go down to theme, we go into typography, we've got a similar approach. Material Design uses displays, so you'll have everything down to display 1, you'll have headline, title. My first approach of building this app was let's just use regular HTML, H1s, H2s, H3s, paragraph tags. But I liked the Material Design approach so much, I decided to go with this. I felt like this was also something that kind of differentiated from your normal HTML. So this just uses all their design principles for typography. But any of these can be customized, and then throughout the app, anytime a display 1 is used, you're going to have that available. With that, let's jump back and see where I'm at here. Oh gosh, images. Images, we could probably spend a few months on. So we'll cover some of the stuff here now, but with images, you run into some trickiness. First off, I don't want to just take whatever the user has and upload that and use that on the website. A lot of times, my clients are working with a designer and they're getting images that are 25 megabytes or 5 megabytes is the smallest one I've ever seen. These are way too big. You try to paint a website with that image, you're going to have challenges with that. And so I needed a way to reduce the image size. For those of you familiar with the HTML5 canvas element, you have complete freedom to adjust the size of images. And so we're going to jump into some components here. Let's go to pages. Let's go to page 2. This is going to be our dog. So with this, I want to jump in and show you a little bit of image editing. So with this, I have 2 different approaches to the image editing. First, we're just going to show the image. I want to give the user what it's going to look like. A lot of the big brand e-commerce, you've got a whole different admin than you do your actual user's interface. And so there's sometimes you don't know what it's going to look like on the actual site. I wanted to get rid of that. So what this allows is you click the image, you're going to be brought up with the image editor. There's also a canvas editor. So why don't we go down here and let's create a new section in this page. We're going to want to define the type. Flexible is going to be a flexible grid. Slideshow is going to be something where it does a slideshow. And then there's also swipables, which allows, if you have a mobile device, you can swipe content from the left and the right. We're going to do flex. Let's update this. Let's go down here and let's add an article. And then let's add an item. We're going to go over how to do this with forms. So with forms, you can have arrays within arrays within arrays in order to create these UI elements. So here we can add an image. It's not showing the image upload button. Must not like the favicon. There's a favicon that goes along with that. Oh, and I don't have an image ready here. Now, did you get the image I sent earlier today? Would I be able to pull that up? It is on the desktop? Beautiful. Oh, perfect. It's right there. So we're going to upload this. So what we're given with this is some image editing stuff that I thought was valuable. We want to be able to zoom in and out in case the client wants to be able to change the aspect of the image. Some hero images, you see this sort of stuff going on where it's a little darker, so that way the text can be visible. I wanted to be able to add that. I've also had requests for gradients. So in some cases, you want to fill a gradient from the top. That one's going to be harder to see. Let's fill it from the bottom. We fill it from the bottom. We can get these image gradients where if we have text at the bottom, it's visible. We get the nice image at the top. You can also do this with background overlays, which is very common in CSS. But I felt let's make these modifications to the image while they're being uploaded so that way we have less weight on the CSS. So that was the reason I took that approach. You're going to see down below this some other options we have. So rotate it left and right. Resize proportionally. Look at the size of this thing, 5760 by 3840. That's way too big for a website, I think, anyway. We are getting in the age of 4K and bigger TVs and 8Ks coming around the corner. So maybe there'll be an appropriate time for this, but right now I feel like this is too big. So I generally go with a 1920 for the width. And if we edit that, it's going to go in with a height of 1280. I could get this and not resize it proportionally and get an actual 1080 for the height if I wanted to do something that's a little bit more standard with screen sizes. But that allows us to do that. We also have the type. So anyone familiar with the canvas knows if we have a JPEG, we can reduce the size greatly. I could take an image that's 4 megabytes, convert it down to a couple hundred kilobytes. So really quick load times. When it comes down to the app rendering and rendering different screens or views, really snappy. However, what if you have a PNG and you need that transparent background? You can switch this to PNG. If you upload a PNG, it's automatically going to use that for the type. But this gives you the ability to change that. Quality, Canvas sets it at 96 dpi by default. The quality isn't going to be changed with this quality indicator here, but the percentage quality, if you will be changed. The canvas element defaults to 92%. However, you can change this down even further if you want and then get an even better reduction in size for your elements. We hit preview. It's going to do two data URI on the canvas element, and it's going to give us our image. Now we have the image. Reduced, sized properly for what we want to store on our server. In the case of what we're going to be doing, I'll go over S3. S3 buckets tends to be very inexpensive. You can hook it up to a CDN and get very quick content delivery. So we'll cover that. Now you're going to see some editing tools for the image. So this is stuff we can do for the actual image itself. We can add a border radius. We could add some elevation. We'll get this thing up here a little bit. Margin flex. So this is stuff that has to do with how the image is positioned. We can also add some typography. Let's go in here and we'll give this a flex of 1,300. So we're not too bad. We'll do a typography of, we'll do that display 1. We'll just add test. Let's go back to this image here, and we need this to have a flex as well, or else this is going to be, we'll do this 300 as well. So those are familiar with Flexbox. It allows you to set the flex grow, flex shrink, and then also kind of the default where it bases things off of. And we don't want that to be that. We want it to be this. Okay, let's get off of this. Let's go save. And this should give us something where we now have something at the proper flex. And so if we start to shrink things, we'll get the nice folding. We'll get, a proper UI look for the mobile devices. So let me jump back. I know we're getting a little tight on time. Control-Tab. There we go. So images, like I said, we could spend hours. Also, the considerations you have to take with image and caching. So if a user uploads a new image and you keep the file name the same, you're not going to get that new image to show because the browser cached the other image. You have to create unique file names. You have to handle those then when you submit your form data to the server because you've got to know whether to remove it from S3 or not. Page, section to component, so that's the structure we're going to follow. And as you saw, we entered a new section. From there, we entered a component, and then we can just go downstream from there. Products, create, read, delete. We'll do some quick stuff with products here. Checkout and order. Also has blogs. Blogs is really similar to products, so we'll touch on that at a later date. And then the search functionality. So the two things I want to cover here before we finish up are products and then the search. So with products, we want to have not only the product tile, so kind of a product summary page, we also want to have the product detail. With these, we do some stuff where we flex this in column formats and this in column formats. So if we end up running into stuff where the image is smaller, we still get stuff centered with the text and vice versa, the other way around. But we'll add a couple items to the cart. We'll go to the cart here. Let's do checkout. For those of you not familiar with Stripe, they recently came out with Stripe Elements, which is a React library of some really slick form inputs. This is probably the slickest one. Due to the screen, you can't see some of the neat little CSS stuff here. It's all whited out, but it is just slick. So we'll do a card number here. It identifies the card. And then I'm just going to do some dummy data to get us an order here. We want to select an address. We'll use the existing one. We can also enter a new address there. And then we place order. This will send an email to the user as well as the owner. So I'll be getting an email right now. And then this is just an order summary page. And if we want to go back to see the product, we can do that. This will also exist in the user's profile. So they'll be able to go down here and look at their orders placed. As well as for the owner, they'll have orders in here. And then we can mark these things shipped. So we shipped the order. It is now shipped. We got a ship date. Last piece is, let's cover the search. Let's go back here. So with search, this is a search through state. And what we do with this is we concatenate all the different pieces of the component. So we've got the title for some of these. We've got this paragraph. We concatenate all those into one string, and then we do an index of to find if we've got a match. And if we got a match, we just pull that up. So with here, let's do my son Weston. Now, I don't have him labeled in an image. Let's do, well, as you can see, we're getting the list here. So as soon as it finds a match, it's going to bring this up. As we get closer to a match, I don't have his name listed, so let's try product. It is just going to keep bringing up more specific matches as we go on. But this allows for really snappy UI. So the search is instant. There's none of this lag time or anything. There are considerations with this. So pagination, as we start to get into larger apps where there might be hundreds of blogs, we don't want to load that all up on the client at once. That's where pagination comes in. That's where there's going to need to be some modifications made to how the search feature works, because right now this is searching through the Redux state and not necessarily through what's in Mongo. So I want to cover the features, user accounts. We're going to create a theme pattern and using Material UI, component customization, products, carts, orders, email notification. We'll go through For those of you not familiar with how to do emails, there's Node Mailer, which is a Node library. Fantastic library. Makes it really easy to set this stuff up and then send out email notification. I'll be connecting it with Gmail. I found any client I've worked with always has Gmail, and so that's kind of the go-to that I use. Blogging, we'll cover that at a later point. Very similar functionality, though, to the products, just without the cart. And then the search. So server libraries, Amazon SWK. Sorry about that word. But for their S3 buckets, I've just found that to be a very cost-effective solution. Pretty easy to set up. So we'll be looking at that. Babel, why not write ES6 on the server? I'm not a big fan of changing the way I have to write things on the client and server. A lot of times I'll use something I created on the client in the server because I like the way the functionality works. So we're going to use Babel. We may be coming to a point where we don't have to do that anymore. I know Node is looking to support imports. They already support async await, which I use heavily, so we may be getting to the point where we don't need to use so much Babel. But for now, that's one of the go-to libraries I have to have. Bcrypt. I'm not a big fan of JSON Web Tokens, so I use Bcrypt to create the tokens. As some of you may be familiar, JSON Web Tokens can be decoded, so if you're going to put anything in there, it's going to be exposed anyway. So why not just create a dummy token and reference it on the server inside your MongoDB in order to get the user information. So we'll be going through that. Mongoose, we need that for schemas, also to connect some middleware. We can do hooks with Mongoose to where anytime a component's deleted, after it's deleted, we hook in, we check if there's an image, we go to S3 and delete the image. Really takes out a lot of the boilerplate needed to handle images. Node Mailer, Stripe, excellent API. Hats off to the Stripe people. They're just doing some fantastic things. Client libraries, of course, Material UI. We're going to use that for the UI. Material UI icons. I don't know how many of you use Bootstrap. Font awesome. But if you open up your app and you open up the network tab and you look, one of your largest dependencies that's loaded will be font awesome. It is not small. Material UI icons allows us to do SVGs, and so we're not getting all this weight just for a few icons. I realize with icons, I'm only using them for social media at the bottom. So there's no reason to import this huge library. I don't necessarily know which ones the client's going to use, so I can't say, well, I'll just import specific ones. So Material UI icon seems to solve that problem for me, but every time I'd open the network tab and I'd see that Font Awesome library pop up, it's one of the largest ones. I'm like, what is going on with that? I got to find an alternative. This is slick stuff. React Draft WSGI, we have a WSGI editor. I didn't really get into that, but for the product editing of the description as well as blogs, I use a WSGI editor. This is a fantastic one, built off a Draft WSGI, or I'm sorry, built off a Draft.js. React.GA, Google Analytics, we're going to want to connect that, so that way we can track page loads. React Helmet, NFL put this out, awesome library. You can dynamically populate the head of the document with anything you want, so you can handle all your OG tags, anything you may need for SEO. React Stripe Elements and Redux Form, this is probably my favorite library to work with. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Erik Rasmussen and what he did with this library, but it's just simply fantastic. The props you get to build and use forms are awesome. It's just so much fun to use. With that timeline, this may be totally variable. We'll see where it goes, but I plan to do one thing a month, so probably next month we'll start with boilerplating. We'll work into authentication, authorization, theming, we'll go into images, let the fun begin. This may be a couple months. It just depends. Images with the canvas and the uploading, there's a lot going on. Components, we'll look at products, carts, orders, blogs, and then implementing the search. With that, I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say I am looking for new projects, so if anyone needs something built, contact me. I'd love to chat. And with that, I'd like to bring up Leslie for a few words. One of our sponsors that I did not mention at the beginning was Women of Code, and they are here supporting this event as well. So they've partnered with Full Stack Lunch in order to provide these events to the community. And with that, I'd like to allow Leslie to say a few words.
Sure. Two different groups. One, the internal Walmart group. This is the women's group who put on this event. We're the ones who are doing all the cleanup and work and setup. And I'm also the director for Women Who Code, and we needed some San Diego, some North County events, some North County love. One of the reasons why, I don't know if the men here noticed full stack meetups that used to run 70 men in a room. I was the one woman. So this is the reason why I have invited Women Who Code, so that we actually get some different faces and some different perspectives going on. So I want to thank everybody who came. Do we have anything else?
We've got raffles.
We've got raffles.
So I want to encourage everyone to come up and grab a ticket from me. And then as soon as it looks like nobody else is coming up, we'll do a raffle. We're going to do 3 of them, so you'll be able to choose from any of those tutorials you saw in the slides before. And each, or any of those individuals, they have multiple tutorials, so you're free to choose what you want from them. But with that, thank you for your participation in the event. I hope it was enriching, as well as providing now a venue for developers to get together in North County. We're kind of testing the ground here with the lunch. So I felt Fridays, a lot of companies have a tech day. Why not provide an opportunity for people to learn what others are doing, as well as have awesome speakers like Mr. Erikson here to cover some amazing libraries.
I also do want to say that we're not kicking anybody out. So you can mingle, network, you can stick around, have another soda, have more pizza. We had a lot of pizza. So stay for the raffle, but you can also stay afterwards.